Emma Carter hadn't come to Willow Creek looking for trouble. When she first saw the tree-lined streets, the neatly trimmed hedges, the rows of near-identical houses with shutters painted in coordinated pastels, she had thought it would be the perfect place to rebuild. After her husband Daniel was killed in a car crash on an icy January morning 2 years earlier, she had been left to raise their son, Tyler, on her own. Tyler, once a healthy, vibrant little boy, had been diagnosed only months after Daniel's death with a rare neuromuscular disorder that robbed him of the ability to walk, move, and eventually breathe on his own. At just 8 years old, he was confined to a bed, his life tethered to a ventilator, a maze of medical tubing, and the constant vigilance of his mother. Willow Creek, with its promises of safety, serenity, and family-friendly appeal, had seemed like the answer to her desperate prayers. She hadn't counted on Karen Whitmore. Karen was the president of the Homeowners Association and proudly wore that title like a badge of military honor. Always impeccably dressed in pressed khakis and a sun visor, she patrolled the sidewalks of Willow Creek with a clipboard in one hand and a coffee mug labeled HOA Queen in the other. Nothing escaped her notice. Unruly lawns, mailboxes painted the wrong shade of beige, garbage cans left on the curb too long. She believed in order, in structure, in rules. And she saw herself as the enforcer of the neighborhood's delicate balance. To Karen, the HOA wasn't just a civic body, it was her personal fiefdom. Emma had her first real run-in with Karen only 3 weeks after moving in. It started with a note taped to her front door. Notice of non-compliance, unauthorized. Exterior equipment. Please refer to Section 5.2 of HOA Policy Guide. Attached was a photo, taken without permission, of the small, white, medical-grade generator Emma had installed next to the garage. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it wasn't in anyone's way either. It was there to ensure that if the power ever failed, Tyler's ventilator wouldn't. It was, in Emma's mind, non-negotiable. Later that same day, Karen knocked. Emma, with Tyler's monitor beeping softly in the background, opened the door cautiously. Karen didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've got 72 hours to remove that generator," she said, eyes sharp behind her oversized sunglasses. "It's a violation of HOA exterior uniformity codes. We maintain standards here." Emma blinked, uncertain she had heard correctly. "It's for my son," she said. "He's on a ventilator. If the power goes out—" Karen raised a hand, cutting her off. "We all have to make sacrifices to live in a community like this. Exceptions become precedents, and precedents become problems. I've filed the paperwork already." Emma's heart began to pound, partly from fear, partly from disbelief. "He could die," she said, her voice shaking. "There are doctor's notes, medical exemptions. I can have them sent." "I'm not heartless," Karen said, tilting her head, "but the board is very clear. Structures like that are only permitted in designated utility areas, fully enclosed, and only with advance approval. If you needed special accommodations, perhaps this wasn't the right community for you." Emma was too stunned to speak. Her fingers clenched the edge of the door as Karen turned and walked briskly down the front path, her clipboard tucked neatly under her arm, like the matter was already settled. As Emma closed the door behind her, she felt the invisible walls of the neighborhood closing in. The following days were tense. Emma spent hours on the phone with Tyler's doctors, the power company, the HOA office, trying to gather any form of documentation that would override Karen's order. Meanwhile, she noticed Karen walking by her house more frequently, always slowing near the generator, occasionally snapping photos with her phone. Other neighbors, once friendly when Emma first moved in, had grown distant. A few offered sympathetic glances but said nothing. Karen's influence in Willow Creek was real, and no one wanted to be on her bad side. One morning, Emma found a pink slip stuck under her windshield wiper. It was another warning. Second notice, non-removal of unauthorized equipment will result in fines of up to $250 per day. Emma crumpled it in her fist. That night, sitting by Tyler's bedside, watching the soft, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, she felt the first wave of true helplessness crash over her. Her boy, so small and so brave, had already suffered more than most adults she knew, and now he was at risk again, not from his illness, but from bureaucracy, from a woman with too much power and too little compassion. She wrote an email to the HOA, attaching doctor's notes, hospital recommendations, even statements from Tyler's pulmonologist and physical therapist. She explained everything. She begged. She tried to be polite, rational, factual. The response came the next morning, a curt email from the HOA legal team. Thank you for your concerns. While we sympathize with your situation, you were made aware of HOA policies upon closing your home. Violations must be resolved within 7 days or further action will be taken. Emma stared at the screen, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. Further action. What did that even mean? Eviction? Fines? Removal of the generator? Her fear wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was looming, real, and dangerous. 2 days later, it escalated. Emma heard the rustling outside the window and looked out just in time to see Karen again, this time with another HOA board member standing by the generator. They didn't touch it, yet, but they spoke in hushed, conspiratorial tones. Emma opened the window and called out, "Please stay off my property." Karen didn't even flinch. "I'm documenting an active violation. This is within my rights under Section 3.9. "It's my son's life," Emma said, her voice breaking. "Please." Karen turned, her mouth curling into what could only be called a smirk. "Then you'd better find another place to live." Emma closed the window with a snap and sank to the floor. Tyler stirred slightly in his bed, the soft beeping of his machines, the only sound breaking the silence of the room. She crawled over to him, resting her head next to his hand, fighting back tears. He didn't know the danger he was in. He just knew that his mother was there, that he was safe, for now. But in the back of her mind, Emma knew. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. This was only the warning sign. The heat that Sunday afternoon was oppressive, the kind that hung low and heavy in the air, refusing to move, the kind that made even the birds retreat to shade and the pavement shimmer with waves of mirage. Emma Carter had already checked the weather that morning and noted the advisory warning. Extreme temperatures. Power grid at risk. She didn't panic. She had planned for this. Ever since Tyler had been placed on full-time ventilation, she had prepared for every contingency. Her garage was filled with medical supplies, extra filters, batteries, and fuel for the generator. She'd rehearsed blackout procedures with herself dozens of times. If anything ever happened to the main power, the generator would kick in, and Tyler's life would continue. No matter what. That's what she told herself, like a silent mantra. No matter what. Around 1:42 p.m., as the sun reached its blazing peak, the house gave a strange, audible click. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. For half a second, Emma froze. She was in the kitchen, refilling a pitcher of water. The refrigerator's hum died. The ceiling fan above her stopped turning. A strange stillness took over. Then, as if on cue, she heard it. The low hum of the generator outside coming to life. A soft whirring that was music to her ears. She rushed down the hallway and into Tyler's room, heart pounding in her throat. The monitor was still blinking. The ventilator hissed gently, delivering oxygen in timed bursts. His vitals were steady. He lay there peacefully, unaware of the temporary chaos. Emma exhaled a shaky breath and placed a kiss on her son's forehead. "We're okay," she whispered. "Everything's working. Mommy's got it under control." She walked outside just to double-check the generator. wanting to be sure everything was running smoothly. It was purring like a cat, the digital panel flashing green. She smiled to herself, prepared. She had done everything right. But that calm lasted only 5 minutes. Inside the house, the beeping stopped. It didn't fade or falter. It simply ceased. A hollow, chilling silence fell over Tyler's room. Emma, who had just returned to the kitchen, heard it instantly. Silence, where there should have been sound. Her brain registered the absence even before she consciously understood it. She sprinted down the hallway. Tyler? No response. The machine was dead. All of it. The ventilator, the monitor, even the backup lights were off. The only sound now was the faint wheeze of her own panicked breathing. Her eyes flew to the cords. No power. Her instincts screamed. She turned on her heel and bolted outside, her bare feet slapping against the hot concrete. That's when she saw her. Karen Whitmore stood next to the generator, holding the thick orange power cable in one hand, like a serpent she had just slain. Her other hand was on her hip, her face a portrait of smug satisfaction. The generator still buzzed, technically alive, but the cable that fed it to the house was dangling, completely disconnected. What the hell are you doing? Emma screamed, her voice rising to a pitch she didn't recognize. Karen didn't flinch. I warned you, Emma. 72 hours. That monstrosity is an unauthorized structure. If you refuse to comply, the HOA has every right to enforce removal. I've documented this. Emma was already moving, shoving past Karen to reconnect the cable. Her hands shook. The heavy-duty plug wouldn't go in straight. She fumbled, her mind screaming over and over again. Tyler's not breathing. Tyler's not breathing. You have no right, she shouted as she jammed the plug into place. This is life support equipment. Are you insane? Karen folded her arms. This is a neighborhood, not an ICU. You're endangering property values. You want a hospital-grade setup? Go live near a hospital. Emma didn't hear the rest. She was already running inside, barefoot and shaking, dialing 911 with one hand while fumbling with Tyler's manual resuscitator bag with the other. She had done CPR training. She knew what to do. But nothing prepares you for doing it on your own child. The dispatcher answered, calm and robotic. 911, what is your emergency? My son, his ventilator's off. Someone unplugged the generator. He's not breathing. Oh my God, please send help, I can't. She broke down in the middle of her sentence, choking on sobs as she cradled the bag over Tyler's mouth and squeezed, desperately trying to push air into his fragile lungs. Ma'am, stay calm. Is your son conscious? No, he's not responsive. He needs oxygen. He's on a ventilator. He's been without it for at least 3 minutes. Please, help is on the way. Stay on the line. Emma continued to compress the bag, each squeeze, a frantic prayer. Her tears fell freely now, soaking the side of Tyler's pillow. He looked so small, so still. The very air seemed to drain from the room. She could barely hear Karen still outside, arguing with someone on her phone, probably boasting to the HOA about her enforcement action. Emma wanted to scream. She wanted to rip the woman from the earth. But all that mattered now was Tyler. The dispatcher's voice came through again. Units are en route. ETA 4 minutes. Is the generator operational now? Yes, but he's not waking up. Oh God, please tell them to hurry. Emma didn't know how much longer she could keep going. Her arms were trembling. Her legs had gone numb from kneeling. Everything inside her was raw, terrified. The reality of what had just happened settled over her like ice. Someone had tried to kill her child, not a stranger, not a natural disaster, but a woman she shared a street with. A woman who valued rules more than a human life. Karen had unplugged her son's lungs. And the worst part? She did it with a smile. There was movement at the front of the house, A thundering sound, boots on pavement, sirens, someone was shouting. Emma barely processed it. Then the front door exploded inward with a loud crack, the frame splintering. "Police! Emergency responders!" She let out a sob so deep it hurt and called out, "In here! Tyler, he's in here!" Medics flooded the room. One took over the resuscitation bag. Another moved to start an IV. Another pulled open a red crash kit. Emma backed away slowly, her hands trembling, her body numb. From outside, she heard another set of voices, barked commands, a woman shrieking in protest, and then silence again. Emma dropped to her knees and watched as they worked on her son, not daring to breathe, not daring to hope. The horror of the moment wrapped itself around her like a net, and all she could think, over and over again, was one sentence that she couldn't erase. She unplugged him. She unplugged my baby. The wail of sirens split the air like a blade, cutting through the humid afternoon stillness of Willow Creek. The calm, orderly suburb, with its manicured lawns and hushed politics, suddenly pulsed with urgency. Red and blue lights danced across the freshly waxed cars and driveways, casting strange patterns across driveways where children had drawn hopscotch games in chalk earlier that morning. But inside the Carter residence, time no longer had any rhythm. It had splintered into before and after, before the generator had been unplugged, before her son stopped breathing, and after, when everything seemed to unfold in slow, terrible motion. Emma crouched just outside Tyler's bedroom, her back against the wall as the paramedics worked, their movements swift and precise. She clutched her phone, its screen still glowing with the open 911 call, though she no longer heard the dispatcher's voice. Her ears rang with the echo of her own cries, and her chest ached from the surge of adrenaline and terror that still coursed through her body. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly predicted, was that her frantic 911 call hadn't just summoned an ambulance. Earlier that year, after Tyler's first medical emergency, the local precinct had flagged their home with a vulnerability priority, a code attached to households with at-risk patients requiring mechanical life support. A simple call mentioning a ventilator shutdown immediately escalated the response to Level 2 priority, a designation just shy of a hostage situation. It was a rare protocol, used only when the patient's life was in immediate danger and couldn't wait for standard response times. But this time, something else pushed it further. Emma's words. She unplugged it. On purpose. "He's dying." The dispatcher, trained to remain composed, had felt a jolt run through her. She'd quickly checked the address, confirmed the child's critical care status, noted the term "on purpose," then flagged the call as sabotage with intent to harm a minor, and initiated a rare secondary escalation, code Red Guardian Compromise. As the dispatcher relayed the call to emergency services, a copy of the transcript was immediately routed to the duty officer at Willow Creek PD. The officer on shift, a no-nonsense lieutenant named Harris, didn't hesitate. He keyed his mic and barked the command. "Deploy SWAT. Child life support interference. Suspect on scene. Possible hostile HOA interference. Move." Across the street, another call was already in progress. Brooks Tanner, a retired Army communications officer, had been sitting on his porch drinking iced tea when he saw it happen. Karen Whitmore, clipboard tucked under her arm, had walked confidently to the side of the Carter house. Brooks had stood up the moment she began fiddling with the cords on the generator. And then, to his absolute disbelief, he watched as she yanked the plug. At first, he thought, she can't possibly mean to do that, but when Emma burst out moments later, frantic and screaming, his instincts kicked in. He dialed the direct line. To the precinct. An old contact from his military days still worked dispatch, and gave a full verbal code. Possible attempted manslaughter. Child with critical needs. Witnessed tampering with medical equipment. Suspect is still present. Immediate backup required. It was more than enough. Now, just 6 minutes after Emma made the call, black SUVs and a squad of armored officers had surrounded the cul-de-sac. The neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, some clutching phones to their ears, others simply gawking. Mrs. Lorne from down the block gasped and covered her mouth. The Johnson twins, age 9, stood on their lawn wide-eyed. As two officers ran past, rifles drawn but lowered, barking commands into radios. And there, near the curb, Karen Whitmore stood frozen, her face paling with each passing second. "What is this? What is happening?" she asked, turning in a slow circle, her authority crumbling in the face of flashing lights and tactical gear. "This is a misunderstanding. I was enforcing a code violation." But the officers didn't respond. They had already received a copy of the 911 transcript. They had heard the mother's voice, wild and terrified, describing the precise moment the child's lifeline was severed. One officer stepped forward. "Hands where we can see them, ma'am. You are being detained for questioning in an ongoing investigation into the deliberate disruption of medical life support equipment. Do not move." Karen's jaw dropped. "Excuse me? I am the president of the HOA. This is harassment." The officer didn't blink. "Ma'am, on the ground. Now." Karen hesitated for a half-second, long enough to regret it. Another officer moved behind her and pulled her arms behind her back. Plastic cuffs clicked tight around her wrists. Across the street, Brooks Tanner nodded solemnly to himself. He didn't like interfering in neighborhood politics. But he knew what he'd seen, and more importantly, he knew the cost of hesitation. Inside, the paramedics finally stabilized Tyler's breathing. His vitals ticked upward, slowly, like a fragile kite rising into the air after being grounded. The lead medic turned to Emma and gave her the first hopeful words she'd heard in what felt like hours. "He's responding. Still weak. But we've got him back on oxygen. We're taking him in for observation." Emma nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She climbed into the back of the ambulance with them, one hand on Tyler's tiny fingers. He still hadn't opened his eyes, but color had begun to return to his cheeks. She whispered to him through her tears. "You're safe now, baby, I promise. She's not going to hurt you again." As the ambulance pulled away, a crowd had gathered around Karen, now sitting on the sidewalk in disbelief. She was shouting to anyone who would listen that this was an outrage, that she was simply upholding the bylaws, that she hadn't meant to harm anyone, but it was too late for explanations. Inside the police vehicle parked beside the curb, a young officer reviewed the audio transcript one more time. His finger paused at the most haunting line. "She unplugged it on purpose. He's dying." He looked over at Karen, now wailing about legal counsel and slander, and felt no sympathy. Meanwhile, Emma rode in the back of the ambulance, her eyes never leaving Tyler's face. But her thoughts were racing now, a storm of pain, rage, and clarity. This wasn't just about HOA policy, it was about power. About people like Karen, who wore authority like armor and wielded it without thought for who got crushed beneath it. This was attempted murder, and Emma was no longer afraid. The still air of Willow Creek exploded with the roar of black armored vehicles careening down the quiet cul-de-sac. Birds scattered from the trees. A lawn sprinkler spun lazily, oblivious to the whirlwind descending upon the suburb. Residents emerged from their homes, mouths open in stunned disbelief. It was surreal, like a scene from a crime show playing out on their own street. But inside 327 Brookview Lane, reality had already shattered. Emma Carter was on the floor beside her son's hospital bed, both hands locked on the resuscitation bag. Her breaths were shallow, quick, wild with panic as she pumped oxygen manually into Tyler's lungs. His tiny chest rose and fell in weak, uneven movements. His skin was clammy, a pale hue that sent terror straight into her spine. She heard the distant wail of sirens and knew help was near, but time felt elastic, stretched painfully across the unbearable space between hope and horror. The generator still hummed from outside, but the damage had already been done. The front door splintered before she ever heard a knock. A crash erupted like a bomb had gone off in her hallway. Emma flinched as a team of black-clad SWAT officers stormed the house with guns drawn, though lowered. Their tactical boots pounded against the hardwood, shouting clear commands. "Police! Show your hands! Medical emergency!" As they swept the space in fluid formation. Two paramedics rushed forward from behind them, their bags already unzipped and ready. Emma didn't protest. She didn't explain. She simply dropped the resuscitator and stumbled back as they took over, attaching fresh oxygen, checking vitals, beginning CPR, calling out numbers. One of them radioed in, "Child is apneic but has faint pulse, initiating emergency transport. At a hospital 15 minutes. Emma backed against the wall, her legs barely able to hold her up. Her mouth moved, but no words came. Her fingers were trembling, soaked in sweat and Tyler's cooling breath. She looked down at her son, so still, so pale, and could barely process that this had all begun with something so mundane as a neighborhood complaint. Meanwhile, just 50 feet away, Karen Whitmore stood on her front porch, arms crossed, holding her phone high above her head like a badge of righteousness. She had been recording the scene since she heard the sirens. She wanted to capture everything. Evidence, she told herself. Evidence of the madness, the overreaction, the drama these people brought into a respectable community. She hadn't expected tactical units, only perhaps a patrol car and an official citation for her records. But when the black trucks arrived, and when she saw heavily armed officers flooding her neighbor's home, a flicker of doubt began to unravel the confidence she wore like a second skin. Still, she couldn't help herself. "This is unlawful." "Entry!" she shouted, zooming in on the officers. "I'm the president of the HOA. That generator violated Code 14.7.2. It's a prohibited structure, non-compliant with visual obstructions and—" Her tirade was cut short by the sharp sound of boots approaching her driveway. Two SWAT officers, faces obscured by black helmets and tinted visors, moved swiftly toward her. One pointed at her phone. "Put the device down and place your hands where we can see them." Karen blinked. "Excuse me? What? This is my property. I'm recording for documentation purposes." The lead officer didn't raise his voice. His words were calm, surgical. "You are under arrest for interfering with life-sustaining medical equipment, reckless endangerment of a minor, and suspicion of attempted manslaughter. Comply now." Karen let out a sharp bark of laughter, eyes darting around to the neighbors, who were beginning to cluster across the street, phones raised, some whispering, others recording. "You must be joking. I was enforcing neighborhood regulations. I gave her 72 hours. She never got to finish the sentence. The second officer swiftly turned her around and pulled her hands behind her back. Zip ties clicked tight around her wrists. She screamed, flailing as they pushed her to her knees. "This is harassment. I'm a board member." "And now you're a suspect," the officer replied without missing a beat. Back inside the house, Emma crouched beside the stretcher as the medics wheeled Tyler out. His face was covered with an oxygen mask. He was alive. Barely, but alive. One of the paramedics gave her a brief nod. "We've got him. Come with us." Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed her bag, shoes forgotten, and ran beside them toward the ambulance parked in front of the ruined entryway. As they exited, she caught a glimpse of the chaos spilling out onto her front lawn, dozens of neighbors watching in silence. Officers taping off the walkway, and there on the sidewalk, Karen Whitmore screaming into the wind like her power had just been stripped bare for all to see. It was surreal. The woman who'd accused Emma of violating property value integrity now sat handcuffed on the concrete, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her superiority shattered in real time. As Emma climbed into the ambulance, she looked back last time and locked eyes with Karen. What she saw wasn't rage or even defiance. It was fear and confusion as if Karen had never imagined that the rules she so ruthlessly enforced could turn against her. The doors slammed shut, and the sirens screamed again, carrying Emma and her son toward the nearest trauma center. Inside the ambulance, Emma held Tyler's hand gently, whispering his name over and over like a prayer. The medic checked vitals and adjusted the oxygen, nodding when a faint heartbeat showed stable rhythm. Emma felt the tension in her chest loosen. Not disappear, but shift into something new. Determination. The ride was a blur. She barely remembered the intake at the hospital. Nurses moving fast, doctors with calm voices, papers signed in shaking hands. But hours later, as Tyler lay in a quiet recovery room with monitors gently beeping again, Emma finally allowed herself to sit still. The air was cool, clean, safe, and for the first time in days, she felt the steel spine of fury rise. Behind her exhaustion, what had happened wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a neighborly dispute. It was a crime. A deliberate, calculated act that almost ended her son's life. And now that Tyler was stable, now that she could finally breathe again, Emma knew exactly what had to happen next. The HOA wouldn't silence her. The bylaws wouldn't protect Karen. And Emma Carter, mother, caretaker, advocate, wouldn't let this be swept away in bureaucracy or community mediation. She was going to press charges. She was going to go public. And she was going to tear down the brittle, cruel facade of civility that people like Karen hid behind. The world needed to know that this wasn't just a story about a power outage. This was about abuse of authority, negligence, and cruelty. This was about the thin line between HOA policy and personal vendetta. And above all, it was about a mother who refused to let her child be another casualty of someone else's ego. Outside the hospital, local news vans had already begun to arrive. Cameras would roll by morning. The story had begun to spread. HOA. President arrested after unplugging child's life support. And reporters were hungry for details. Emma didn't care about the cameras. She didn't care about the headlines. All she cared about was justice. She stood at the window of Tyler's hospital room and watched the sun begin to rise, casting golden light across his bed. He was still sleeping, still recovering. But he was alive, and so was she. The days that followed the harrowing incident at the Carter residence were unlike anything Willow Creek had ever witnessed. News crews swarmed the quiet suburban streets. Like bees to honey, their cameras set up at the entrance to the neighborhood and along the once peaceful cul-de-sac now turned into an unofficial crime scene. Bright headlines flashed across screens and newspapers. HOA tyrant endangers sick child. SWAT delivers justice. Mother fights back against cruel neighborhood power play. And community rallies behind family after attempted life support sabotage. The story was raw, emotional, and utterly gripping. Emma Carter, once a reserved mother fighting quietly for her son's survival, was now the face of a broader movement. The fight against abuse cloaked in authority, the fight for compassion, over cold, rigid policies. Inside the hospital, as Tyler's condition steadily improved, Emma was approached by reporters, neighbors, and legal advocates. She answered questions carefully, her voice steady despite the whirlwind around her. She spoke not only for herself and her son, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of bureaucracy. "This isn't just about a dispute between neighbors," she said in a televised interview. "It's about how far some people will go to enforce control and the devastating consequences that can have on vulnerable lives." Meanwhile, the legal case against Karen Whitmore unfolded quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The 911 call that captured Emma's frantic plea, security footage from Brooks Tanner's house that showed Karen approaching the generator with deliberate intent, and the testimony of paramedics and police officers who witnessed the aftermath. The defense tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, an unfortunate enforcement of community rules. but the cold facts spoke louder. The judge was clear in his statement. Interfering with life-sustaining medical equipment was a felony, especially when done with intent to cause harm. Karen was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with a permanent restraining order barring her from any contact with the Carters or their property. The HOA board, shaken by the scandal and public outrage, voted to disband. A new leadership committee was formed with a focus on transparency, empathy, and prioritizing the well-being of all residents, especially those with special medical needs. The neighborhood, once divided and tense, slowly began healing, united by the shared trauma and the determination to never let something like this happen again. For Emma and Tyler, life was forever changed. A generous, anonymous donor, moved by their story and the injustice they suffered, purchased them a new home just a few miles away, one specially equipped with advanced medical technology, including backup power systems and state-of-the-art ventilators. The house had wide hallways for wheelchair access, automatic doors, and a garden designed for quiet afternoons in the sun. It was a fresh start, a safe place where Tyler could grow without fear. Brooks Tanner, the retired Army officer who had witnessed Karen's malicious act and called the authorities, became a close friend and regular visitor. He helped Emma navigate local resources and even taught Tyler a few tricks to keep his spirits up when the medical equipment became overwhelming. "Family isn't always blood," Brooks told Emma one afternoon as they watched Tyler play with his tablet in the sunlit living room. "Sometimes it's the people who stand up for you when no one else will." The ordeal also transformed Emma herself. She found her voice and used it powerfully. She spoke at local councils and healthcare forums, advocating for stronger protections for families with medically vulnerable members. She worked with nonprofit groups to raise awareness about the dangers of petty cruelty disguised as rule enforcement. Emma became a symbol of resilience, proof that even in the darkest moments, fierce love and relentless courage could light the way forward. Yet no matter how much she moved on, no matter how many victories she won, Emma never forgot the moment that had changed everything. The moment Karen had unplugged the generator and almost ended her son's life. It haunted her not with bitterness, but as a solemn reminder of the stakes involved whenever power is abused. It reminded her why she fought so hard, not just for her son, but for every family who might one day face a similar nightmare. 2 minutes after the plug was pulled, SWAT had kicked down the door. 2 minutes later, Tyler was alive again. 2 minutes later, justice was served, and in those 2 minutes, a mother became a warrior, a community was forever changed, and the truth shone brighter than any harsh rule or cold policy ever could. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and join us at the HOA Stories, where real-life neighborhood dramas come to light. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below to let us know your thoughts or if you've ever faced a situation like this. Together, we uncover the truth behind the quiet streets and show that every voice matters. Stay tuned for more shocking, eye-opening HOA tales, only here on the HOA Stories.